part of Scotland where the mist roll over the highlands and the sea crashes against the ancient cliffs, there lies a tale so dark it has haunted the nation for centuries. A tale of a hidden cave, a bloodthirsty family, and a legacy of unimaginable horror. Imagine it, a cold, moonless night in the 16th century Scotland, the wind howling through the desolate, rocky landscape of Galloway. A lone rider, cloaked in furs to ward off the biting chill, urged his horse along the rough, narrow road that wound through the hills. The thick fog that clung to the ground obscured his view, turning the path ahead into a shadowy, indistinct ribbon. His heart pounded, and he kept a hand on the hilt of his sword, knowing well the dangers that lurked in the untamed wilds beyond the villages. Tales of disappearances were common, of travelers vanishing on these isolated routes. Few spoke openly of the cause, but whispered rumors told of something darker than mere highwaymen. A clan of cannibals living in caves, emerging only at night to prey upon the unsuspecting. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a rustle in the underbrush. The rider's horse snorted nervously, sensing danger before the rider could react. Before he could spur the animal forward, figures materialized from the darkness. Their faces were pale, wide-eyed, with matted hair hanging in tangles around their gaunt cheeks. The stench of decay clung to their ragged clothing. The Bean clan, they were grotesque. Their appearance twisted and monstrous, as if the product of generations of isolation, malnutrition, and unspeakable horrors. Their skin, so very pale, almost sickly white, stretched taut over malformed bones that jutted out at unnatural angles. Their features almost deformed, eyes too large for their faces, with deep-set yellowed pupils that gleam like sickened lanterns in the dim torchlight. Their eyes, they held the same cruelty as the rest of their faces, twisted in an animalistic expression. Faces of pockmark and scars, as if their own twisted hands had clawed at their flesh out of frustration, leaving deep, raw welts and scars that never healed. Their teeth jagged, yellow, blackened from years of gnawing on human flesh, some teeth broken and uneven, giving them the appearance of savages who hadn't known the meaning of a comb or a razor in their lifetime. The men were hulking and misshapen, their limbs thick with muscle that had grown in unnatural proportions, giving them the appearance of beasts more than men. Their fingers were long, bony claws, the nails yellowed and cracked, perfect for tearing the human flesh from the bone. The women of the clan were no less freakish, though their forms were hunched and twisted in different ways. Their hair hung in thick, greasy clumps down their backs, and you can imagine the smell. Their lips cracked and swollen, as if they had been gnawing on anything and everything the pharaohs could get their hands on. Their voices hollow grunts, as if talking in their own animalistic language. And the children, with twisted bodies of deformity, crawled and moved in strange, unsettling ways. It was as if their bones had been bent and reshaped by some unholy force, causing them to scuttle on all fours like something out of a nightmare. The entire clan was an abomination, their appearance like something spawned from a twisted and toxic explosion. Their forms a nightmare from years of incest and violence left to rot in the deep, remote cave that they called home. The rider suddenly ambushed, stunned before he even knew what was happening. His cries soon faded, the clan quickly vanishing back to the shadows, dragging their prize with them. Another victim lost to the insatiable hunger of the Bean family. Yet the legend of their reign of terror had only begun to spread, and in the quiet villages of Scotland, whispers grew louder of the night stalkers, the missing travelers, and the dark deeds hidden in the depths of the Sawney Bean's accursed cave. Alexander Sawney Bean was born in East Lothian, approximately 9 miles to the east of Edinburgh. Most versions of the tale put his birth around the reign of King James VI of Scotland. Son of a hedger and ditcher, he became a tanner by trade. However, hard work was not his forte, and he eventually decided to give up making an honest living and fled to County Galloway. Sawney Bean eventually took up with a woman many claimed was a witch, known as Black Agnes. The newlywed Mr. and Mrs. Sawney Bean set up home at Benane Cave by Ballintree in Ayrshire, Scotland. Benane Cave was rather an imposing abode, with tunnels penetrating the solid rock and extending for more than a mile in length. In addition, the accommodation featured lots of side passages where a young couple could extend into and convert over the next 25 years to accommodate a growing family. The cave's entrance was flooded for several hundred meters twice a day at high tide, giving the cave some seclusion and making it very hard to find by outsiders. Lacking a trade, it was Sawney's plan to support his new wife on the proceeds of robbery. It proved a simple enough matter to ambush travelers on the lonely, narrow roads that connected the villages of the area. And then it dawned on him that in order to help make sure that he could never be identified by his crimes, he would have to murder his victims. And to avoid those unnecessary visits to the shops for provisions, while at the same time disposing of any evidence, he came upon the bright idea of butchering the bodies to provide a high-protein diet of human meat for himself and his wife. The high-protein diet seemed to have been effective, as Mrs. Bean began to produce little baby beans. 14 little beanie babies in total, each with a very unhealthy appetite for human flesh. As the beanie babies grew up and, in turn, through incest, produced beanie babies of their own, their cooking pots increased in size dramatically. Over 2 decades, generations of beanie babies grew up in Benane Cave, refining their skills of murder and cannibal cuisine, including the now lost art of salting and pickling the flesh. Finds of curiously preserved but decaying body parts were discovered washed up on the surrounding beaches of the area. The local authorities had by now established what must have been, and what still is to this date, the longest missing persons list ever produced. Although mass searches of the area were carried in order to locate either the missing people or the murderers, nobody ever thought to search the depths of the Benane Cave. As the years went by, the family grew older, and thanks to their high-protein diet, bigger. And as the family grew, so did their appetite. As many as half a dozen victims would be ambushed and killed at a time in military-style operations by the Sawney Bean army. Bodies were taken back to the cave to be carefully prepared for the larder by the womenfolk. In reality, the cave was the ideal location for the Bean family to conduct their grisly carnival of murder and cannibalism. The cave, located off the Ayrshire coast, consisted of tunnels almost half a mile long penetrating the solid rock. There were a large number of side passages that the couple could flee into should they ever be pursued by the police. With no evidence to link him to any of the crimes, Bean was free to carry out his incredible murder spree. The couple produced a total of 8 sons, 6 daughters. Through incestuous relations, a total of 32 grandchildren were produced over the course of a couple of decades. At this stage, the clan consisted of 48 people. Bean's sons followed in his footsteps, and together they continued to murder innocent travelers unfortunate enough to cross paths with this cannibalistic clan. Over the years, an estimated 1,000 people went missing, and as the clan was continuing to grow and kept hidden away in their secret cave, it seemed as if they could continue indefinitely. Within the depths of the Bean clan's cave, the preservation of the grisly harvest was an essential part of their survival. Here, the clan had devised a method to extend their grotesque feasts by pickling body parts, storing them for future consumption in the furthest reaches of the cave where the darkness was greater. The pickled remains were stored in large, rudimentary barrels fashioned from scavenged wood and sealed with tar, creating a sickening parody of food preservation. Each barrel, though crudely made, served its horrifying purpose, housing dismembered limbs, organs, and other body parts suspended in briny, putrid liquid. The smell that emanated from those barrels were nearly unbearable, a mix of sour rot and salt water, with sickly sweetness of decaying flesh lingering just beneath the surface. The sight of these pickled remains would have been enough to drive any sane person mad, the ultimate symbol of the Sawney Bean clan's descent into inhumane savagery. In the darkness of the cave, surrounded by these containers of death, the line between human and monster was utterly obliterated. By the time the Bean sons had reached adulthood, the clan was able to murder up to 6 people at a time and bring their remains back to the cave. At this stage, it appeared as if the Bean clan's murderous spree would never end. But one night, they picked the wrong target. There was a fair taking place nearby, and the gang knew that there would be lots of easy pickings. They got greedy. They attacked a couple on horseback and pulled the woman to the ground. The unfortunate victim was stripped and disemboweled with grisly precision, and it seemed certain that her husband was next. Despite the despair of witnessing the death of his wife, the man fought back valiantly and was able to hold the gang at bay for a short period. Commotion from the fight was heard by a group of up to 20 people who were also on their way home from the fair. The Sawney Bean clan initially held their ground, but soon realized they were outnumbered and fled back to their cave. For the first time, they had left a witness alive, and this would be their downfall. The man who had escaped the Beans met with the chief magistrate of Glasgow and told him the story. The magistrate knew the perpetrators were responsible for scores of deaths and brought the matter to the King of Scotland, who was probably James VI at the time. He ordered a huge search of the Ayrshire coast, but initially his men found nothing. That is until the bloodhounds picked up the scent of decaying human flesh near a waterlogged cave. This was the beginning of the end for the Sawney Bean clan, because the king's troops entered the cave when they had the opportunity and carefully walked through the twisting passage to the lair of the cannibals. The troops were aghast at what they saw. Dozens of body parts and human limbs hung up like a butcher shop, as well as clothes, jewelry, and other possessions of the clan's victims. Bean Clan were shocked by the arrival of the troops, and while they did try to fight their way to freedom, the troops outnumbered them. And soon, the cannibal clan were arrested. The king marched them to Edinburgh, and rather than receiving a fair trial, all 48 members of the Sawney Bean clan were sentenced to death. The 27 men were the first to die. Their arms and legs were cut off and they bled to death. The 21 women were burned at the stake like witches. Seems horrible, but when you think of it, all the torturing that they did to the innocent travelers, you kind of change your mind, don't you? These days they would be imprisoned with a fair trial, but those times were more brutal. As the story of the Sawney Bean clan wasn't told for over 200 years after it supposedly happened, it is hard to take it seriously. Also, there is little or nothing in the way of cold, hard evidence to support the idea that a murderous family of cannibals was able to eat 1,000 people over the course of 25 plus years. There is also a possibility that the macabre tale was based on the apparently real-life cannibal Andrew Christie. He was a butcher in the town of Perth, but almost became a victim of a famine in the middle of the 14th century. Andrew joined a number of scavengers on the foothills of the Grampians, and when one of the desperate men died, Andrew used his butchering skills to carve up the corpse and serve a meal to the rest of the group. As a result, the group developed a taste for human flesh, and with Andrew as their leader, they roamed the countryside looking for victims. Much like the Bean clan, Andrew's group ambushed lonely travelers and ate them, along with their horses. According to legend, Andrew would pull victims off their horses with a cleek, a hook, and this is how he got his nickname, Cleek. Overall, the gang murdered up to 30 people until one day, an armed government force arrived in the Grampians and found the cannibal group. They killed or captured the majority of the group, but Andrew managed to escape into the mountains. His fate is unknown, but there is a suggestion that he moved to the town of Dumfries under the name of David Maxwell. He got married, had 3 daughters, enjoyed a good life as a prosperous merchant, and he only confessed that he was Andrew Christie Cleek on his deathbed. While the legend of the Sawney Bean clan is far better known, the story of Andrew Christie Cleek is far older. The cannibal was first mentioned in a chronicle of Scotland by Andrew of Windtown in 1420. With their monstrous, mutated appearance and horrific acts of cannibalism, their legend has often been echoed in various forms of media, most notably in films like The Hills Have Eyes. And I'm not gonna lie, since watching that movie, every time that I am in the day nowhere, I think about being attacked by an inbred family waiting to use my body, like making a purse out of me or a stew. I keep my car doors locked. So I can definitely say that this legend has had its effect even on me in the hills of California. The haunting image of a clan living in the wild, cut off from society, and engaging in horrific primal violence parallels the legend surrounding the Sawney Bean family is in all of our subconscious. The eerie, unsettling nature of this clan, with their barbaric practices and monstrous, feral appearance, has been a source of inspiration for horror fiction, making them a symbol of human monstrosity and the fear of the unknown lurking just beyond civilization. It has also inspired other scary movies like Hannibal, Who Was a Cannibal, and Wrong Turn, where you end up in the sticks with inbred killers thrilled to make you their next hunt. But despite the chilling stories and the lasting impact, the Sawney Bean legend is almost just that, a legend. There are severe doubts about the veracity of this entire tale. The human imagination is a great thing, though, creating our own macabre fears and running with it. But if you do ever take a wrong turn out there somewhere and you are deep out of civilization and your imagination starts running wild, make sure you bring a spare tire and that you are armed and ready, just in case. You never know what might be lurking out there in the mountains. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think. Leave those comments. I love you all, and I will see you next time on Tales Told in the Dark.